There are doors in history that never made it into books. Doors without names, without stories, only silence behind them. But tonight, we pass through one of them. No fanfare, no legions, no emperors, just a threshold. Simple, forgotten, cool with dust and memory. Outside, the Roman world still hums, the scrape of sandals, the flicker of torchlight, the distant clatter of amphora being unloaded at the port. But once you cross that threshold, the city falls away, as if someone has closed a curtain between you and everything loud, public, and known. This is not history as we're taught it. This is not conquest or marble speeches or gods demanding sacrifice. This is the private Rome, the Rome of the few who could afford to live not just well, but exquisitely. Tonight, we step not into the Forum, but into the Domus, not the empire, but its most hidden, curated sanctuaries. The homes where every wall whispered something, and nothing was accidental. So if you're listening with your eyes half closed, if your room is dim and your thoughts are already beginning to drift, you're exactly where you need to be. Take a breath, settle in, and before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. But only if slow, quiet stories like this help you drift. And in the comments, tell me, where are you listening from? And what time does history find you tonight? It still stirs me every time to see how far and wide this quiet ritual has reached. Now, let's go where the lamps burn low and the walls remember everything. It starts, as many Roman things do, with a threshold, plain, worn, perhaps flanked by twin laures, the smiling household gods, who have stood eternal guard for generations. The door opens, not with effort, but with invitation, and the moment you step through, the sound changes. The echo of footsteps disappears into polished stone. The air grows cooler, still. You're standing now in the atrium, the open heart of the Roman Domus. The roof above you parts like an eye, the compluvium, letting in moonlight and stars. And beneath it, directly below, a pool waits silently, the impluvium. Tonight it holds no rain, only still water that reflects both the sky above and the flickering glow of oil lamps nearby. The floor beneath your feet is alive with memory, mosaics made from thousands of tiny tesserae, arranged in scenes that only reveal themselves if you take the time to stop and look. Here, a myth, Apollo chasing Daphne as she turns to laurel. There, Odysseus resisting the sirens. The images were not chosen at random. They speak, quietly, of taste, of intellect, of control. To walk across them is to walk on centuries of encoded meaning. A servant slips past you, faceless, soundless, little more than the brush of linen against skin, a presence unnoticed by those who live here, but vital to the house's breath. In Rome, wealth moves like air. It circulates without name, without recognition, but it keeps everything alive. Just beyond the atrium lies the tablinum, the study, where the master receives select visitors, a room not for work, but for theater. Behind it, more private chambers stretch out like secrets, cubicula for sleep, aulae for ancestral masks, tricliniums for intimate meals. each wall painted with deliberate care, not grand murals of victory in battle, but delicate vines, mythological lovers, gods reclining, perhaps a quiet satire hiding in the shadow of a fig tree. Some images are innocent, others less so, but all are intentional, because in a Roman home, art was not for beauty, it was for statement, for performance. Every inch of the space told guests, I am learned, I am wealthy, I know what pleasure is supposed to look like, and I have chosen to live inside it. You walk deeper still, into the peristyle, the open-air garden surrounded by colonnades. Everything is symmetrical, restrained, quiet. Lemon trees and roses bloom even at night. A small fountain sings somewhere in the dark. Its sound is not dramatic, just persistent, like breath. Marble statues pose between the greenery. Venus, a faun, a reclining nymph with one hand always reaching, always waiting. Even here, in the garden, there is no wildness. Beauty is trimmed, pruned, and held in place. And then something shifts. A murmur far off, laughter refined and low, the faint clink of silver, a hint of wine. The damus, which seemed to sleep, begins to stir. This house, this marble womb of wealth, is waking for the night, and its true purpose is about to unfold. Because the damus was never meant only for rest. It is not merely a home. It is a stage, a container for appetite, for performance, for the kind of pleasures that must be hidden behind stone walls and crimson curtains, where every gesture is calculated, every guest selected, every indulgence perfectly timed. And tonight, something is being prepared. You can sense it in the rhythm of distant footsteps, in the careful pitch of voices behind closed doors, in the smell of roasted meat, and the faintest trace of cinnamon drifting slowly through the air like a promise. The city outside sleeps, but inside this house, the night has only just begun. Behind a velvet curtain, the table is already set. The wine is breathing. The dancers are stretching, their movements lithe, patient, and the host has been waiting. Shall we slip inside?
The curtain parts, not with grandeur, but with grace, a whisper of crimson velvet, drawn aside by hands you do not see. You enter, and at first it feels like dusk has followed you inside. The room is dim, not dark, lit only by low oil lamps resting in bronze sconces, their flames flickering gently against frescoed walls. The light doesn't demand attention, it drapes everything in gold. Everything it touches looks softer, warmer, older. A long table stretches before you, but it is not built for dining in rows. No chairs, no symmetry, only couches, the clini, angled around a central spread of dishes and bowls. Guests recline in half embrace with the cushions, robes folding like ripples. They eat with one hand, the other free to gesture, to pour, to touch. This is not a meal. This is an atmosphere. The host sits closest to the action, but never at the head. Position matters here, not for command, but for impression. A well-placed guest sends a message more subtle than a speech, and all around the room those messages float unspoken. Who was invited? Who was seated behind whom?
who arrived late, and whether it was on purpose. The scent in the air is layered, lamb roasted with coriander, honeyed dates still warmed from the coals, fig cakes wrapped in leaves, steam rising in slow spirals. Someone lifts a cover from a silver dish, and laughter follows. The food is not merely sustenance, it is a performance in courses. Each flavor imported from somewhere farther than the last. Saffron from Cilicia, pepper from the Indus, wine from Falernum. You can taste the empire here, distilled into sweetness and salt. And then, the dancers. They do not arrive all at once. First comes the music, soft strings, a breath of reed pipe, a pattern of claps that ripple like water across the mosaic floor. Then the dancers appear, not from behind a curtain, but from the room itself, as if they had always been part of it. Young, balanced, their movements fluid, almost underwater. They don't dance to entertain, they dance to invite. A turning wrist, a lifted eyebrow, a step just a little too close. And though you are not part of this world, you can feel how the guests respond, not with a pause, but with stillness, with eyes that follow, that linger. At the edges of the gathering, slaves pour wine without speaking. Their movements are memorized, elegant, invisible. The wine itself is dark, sweet, heavy with resin and memory. It's mixed with water, yes, but not too much, just enough to blur the line between restraint and abandon. As the night deepens, so does the atmosphere. The talk grows looser, warmer. Philosophy slips in between bites of spiced eel and roasted pear. A guest quotes Homer, another counters with Virgil. But none of it is about knowledge. It's about rhythm, wit, timing. The true game here is not what you say, but how easily you can make it sound effortless. A woman sings, not loudly and not for the room. She sings for one person, perhaps, or for herself. Her voice does not seek attention. It drapes the air like smoke. You can't remember when she started. You hope she never stops. This is what Roman indulgence looked like. Not orgy, not chaos, not wildness, but control, precision, 100 tiny performances, each designed to blur the line between pleasure and power. This feast is not about fullness. It is about presence, about knowing and being known without ever naming what you want. Every element here is selected, curated, positioned. The couches are spaced just so, allowing glimpses across the room, chance eye contact that isn't quite chance. The frescoes on the walls depict not only gods and myths, but private echoes of longing. Venus, emerging from her shell. Narcissus, gazing into his pool. Echo, mid-lament. These aren't just stories, they're cues. Even the silence has shape. When no one speaks, it isn't awkward. It's an offering, a breath, a pause in which something unspoken might arrive. And all the while, behind it all, behind the dancers, the food, the warmth, something else lingers. A hunger not entirely fed by fruit or fire. Because here indulgence is performance, and performance is always laced with danger. One wrong phrase, one misstep, one sideways glance held too long, and a guest may find themselves excluded from the next gathering, or worse, whispered about. In a society obsessed with appearances, that is a fate more cutting than exile.
The night stretches long, jugs are emptied and refilled, the candles burn lower, a flute plays something ancient and slow, and as the last course is cleared, a dish of almonds and honey, sticky and fragrant, a guest leans back and exhales, not from hunger, but from the weight of having been seen and having survived. You wonder for a moment what the slaves think of it all, the silent ones, the invisible ones, the ones who keep the wine cool and the fruit clean, and the secrets contained. Do they laugh at the guests in quiet corners? Do they mimic them behind closed doors? Or do they know something deeper, that pleasure, at this scale, always has a cost? But before that thought can settle, a ripple moves through the room. The host rises, not to speak, but to signal. The night is not over. The air is warmer now, heavy with expectation. A door opens, not back to the atrium, but to another world entirely. One where water glows in the lamplight and whispers echo off stone. The guests follow, slowly, like smoke drawn toward heat. And so do we.
It begins with a breath of steam, not harsh, but soft. The kind that curls around your shoulders like a shawl and kisses the skin before it clings. The room you enter is quiet, tiled in shades of sand and shadow. Light slants in from a high vent above, and the air feels ancient, as though it's been holding stories for centuries. The thermae, or private baths of the elite, are not places to simply wash. They are sanctuaries of transformation, a setting where skin is made smooth, tongues made looser, and alliances made real. Every noble household of stature had its own bathing suite, hidden deep in the home, carved in marble and silence. The guests disrobe, not with shame, but with ceremony. Garments slide away like whispers, leaving behind only the gleam of oiled skin and the hush of bare feet on stone. No one stares, no one comments. Here, the body is not a spectacle, it is an equalizer. Power does not always wear clothes. Pools of different temperatures lie like mirrors. The frigidarium, cold and sharp like a blade, the tepidarium, mild and soothing, and the coldarium, where hot water and ambition simmer side by side. People pass between them slowly, deliberately, allowing conversation to steep. Here, speech softens, voices lower, not out of secrecy, but intimacy. This is where decisions are hinted at, where disputes from the Senate vanish in the haze of lavender oil and heat. A glance exchanged in steam, a laugh that carries a warning, a favor asked in the pause between plunges. Slaves attend without being seen. They pour water, massage shoulders, anoint with scented oil. They are the keepers of comfort and of secrets. One wrong word here, whispered to the wrong ear, could shatter a reputation, but most know better than to speak without purpose. Among the pillars, bodies stretch and slide into water like poetry. You see old men with tired eyes and full bellies, young politicians with smooth chests and sharper smiles, women of status wrapped in linen and scent, speaking softly with fingers dipped in the water's edge. Not all conversations here are verbal, and not all invitations are innocent. some spend hours in this warm, liminal space where no hour seems to pass. Games are played, not with dice or stones, but with words, with glances, with decisions deferred just long enough to gain an edge. In Rome, bathing was not a pause from life, it was a theater for the most delicate acts of power. Perfumed oil is poured from long-necked vessels. The masseurs, usually Greek slaves trained in pressure and silence, knead away not just knots, but anxiety. They press the day out of flesh until only softness remains. To be massaged in this context is not just indulgence, it is vulnerability made acceptable by wealth. The heat, the sweat, the dimness, it all begins to blur the boundaries. Who is a guest? Who is a rival? Who is watching? Near the laconicum, the dry room, you hear laughter, not forced, not wild, but familiar. A senator speaks of Egyptian glass, of a shipment lost at sea. Another answers with a story about dolphins and a nude poet who swam too far from shore. But listen closely. Between their words, a proposal, veiled, a warning, sheathed in mirth. Rome does not write everything down. The women's baths in another wing mirror the men's, but echo differently. Here, political wives meet without husbands. They soak, they speak. Sometimes they conspire. One adjusts her stola, exposing a shoulder. Another hides her smile behind a goblet of cooled mulsum. Couriers are not needed when news flows better with steam. The walls are decorated not with triumphal processions, but with images of nymphs and naiads, beings that belonged to water, to whisper, to change. These figures do not shout, they invite, and they remind the bather, water remembers, it listens. Some baths are even more private still, hidden beyond what most guests will ever see, tiny plunge pools tucked behind heavy doors, reserved for whispered confessions or seductions that cannot wait. The line between bathhouse and bedroom is a thin one here. A favored guest may be invited to such a space. You feel the difference as soon as you enter, the stillness of the water, the softness of the light, the sound of a lute barely audible beyond the stone. No one speaks, only offer you their hand, slick with oil and certainty. And yet it is not always about desire. Sometimes it is strategy. The warm hand that rests on your knee might belong to someone who will champion your cousin's candidacy. The fingers drawing a pattern on your shoulder might be promising gold for a future campaign. Proximity here is currency. By now, your skin is flushed. Your breath has slowed. Time feels like honey, thick, sweet, and indifferent to urgency. One elderly guest arises from the culdarium, helped gently by two attendants. He has not spoken all night, but the others nod as he passes. This man once brokered peace between two factions over hot water and cold logic. And though his voice has faded, his memory steams in the air. This is the Rome most never see, a place where intimacy is crafted not only through love or lust, but through shared silence, through the ease of nakedness in the presence of peers, and the knowing that even in quiet, decisions are being made. You notice it now. The walls sweat too, not with heat, but with history. This marble has heard things. It has seen alliances born and promises broken. The water below your feet, it carries the echoes. There are no records of what happens here, no ledgers, no letters, just the feel of skin against stone, and the faint scent of mint crushed beneath a sandal. These are the spaces where Rome keeps its truest self, warm, veiled, and slightly scented. And then, just as quickly as it began, the mood shifts. One guest arises from the coldarium, helped gently by two attendants. Another follows. The ripple has started again. You sense it. Something is next. Something even more private. You dry your feet on woven cloth. A servant brings you a fresh robe. It smells of rose water and salt. You follow the others, not because you were summoned, but because to hesitate would be to miss something. And this house, this night, it does not repeat itself.
Some rooms in the Roman domus were never meant to echo with public footsteps. They opened only when the lamps were low and the conversation too delicate to be held over dinner. In these spaces, hushed, draped in fine cloth and darker intention, the line between service and seduction faded into smoke. Not every guest of the house came for politics. Some came for companionship, or something that pretended to be. Not all indulgence was loud. Some was soft, fluent, and exquisitely trained. In elite Roman society, courtesans and companion slaves occupied a strange, shifting tier in the social order, visible and invisible at once. They were not wives, nor were they common prostitutes. Their presence was curated, their skills honed. These individuals, male and female, were often educated. Some played the lyre, recited poetry, debated philosophy. Others danced not only with their bodies, but with their words, weaving layers of innuendo and comfort that made a patron feel clever, even in their vulnerability. The art was never in what they offered, but in how little they asked. To the outsider, these figures might seem tragic, owned, arranged, sometimes gifted like rare perfumes between powerful men. But within the system, many learned how to navigate influence. A glance in the right moment, a story dropped into the right ear, could sway more than a Senate vote. Power does not always wear armor. Sometimes it leans in close and listens. Take Claudia, for example, a name we've given her, though her real one is long lost. She arrived in Rome from a Greek port as a child, trained in the house of a patrician woman who prized both music and discretion. By 17, she could play 3 instruments, quote Sappho by heart, and recite Virgil with a tremor in her voice that was neither false nor accidental. She was not free, but she was present in every important room, quietly altering its tone. Or Lucius, a young man kept not for war, but for laughter. His presence was a balm. He could speak in 4 languages, write verses that softened angry hearts, and walk beside his master in silence when silence was all that was needed. His body, yes, was often requested, but his true value was his calm. In a world of constant calculation, he made even the jaded feel seen. Their rooms were never far from the triclinium, the dining area, but always just out of view. They entered only when summoned,
and often disappeared long before dawn. Some were loved, some were used. Most were both. Their legal status was, of course, non-existent. Companion slaves, however talented or adored, could be sold, punished, or dismissed without notice. But their social power, the way they moved through spaces, threaded through alliances, and held memories no scroll would dare record, was very real. They saw the real faces of Rome's elite, not the public masks worn in marble halls, but the expressions made in candlelight: shame, fear, desire, regret. They tended not only to bodies, but to egos and grief, and because of this, many held influence far beyond what their titles suggested. Some grew old and faded quietly, passed to younger heirs, or released into uncertain freedom. Others wrote memoirs, though none have survived. Their stories, like their names, dissolve in the steam of Roman excess. But tonight, in this house, they are still here. One reclines against a velvet cushion, feeding grapes to a man who once commanded legions. Another kneels beside a senator's wife, braiding her hair while reciting lines from Euripides. Their presence is not intrusive. It is essential. The evening flows through them, through the songs they sing, the stories they offer, the attention they pour like wine into any empty glass. And as the night deepens, you begin to notice they are not the ones being watched, they are the ones watching. They know who drinks too quickly, who lies about their finances, who blushes when touched, and who doesn't. Their gaze is a ledger, their silence a form of authorship. And yet, there is tenderness too, a touch offered not for payment, but for comfort. A moment of stillness amid the performance. Not every gesture tonight is an act. Not every embrace is purchased. Some things, even here, even now, are real. There's a curtain in the back of the room, rustling with motion. Behind it, laughter, the musical kind, light and unguarded. Someone is telling a story. Someone else interrupts with a joke that breaks the tension. There's no audience here, only the performers and each other. And it reminds you, the domus is a stage, yes, but it is also a cocoon. Not everything here is for power. Some of it is simply for feeling. Soon, the guests will retire, some alone, some accompanied. A few will write letters by candlelight, others will dream dreams that won't survive the morning. But for now, the house glows with life, with bodies at ease, with voices soft, with silk sliding across marble, and with the quiet understanding that pleasure, when offered with dignity, becomes something far more than indulgence.
When power becomes habit, thrill must be hunted elsewhere. Evenings in the domus are curated, exquisite, but predictable. For the most jaded elite, the marble walls eventually feel too clean, the art too deliberate, the pleasures too rehearsed. And so some Romans, the wealthiest, the boldest, step beyond their homes, cloaked in midnight and anonymity, seeking something messier, wilder. They disappear into private villas on the outskirts, cellars beneath wine shops, gated gardens behind unmarked doors. There, Rome's upper crust gathers for something not advertised, but always known. These were the elite clubs, the shadow salons, the secret bacchanalia.
And no, they were not always orgies. Some were philosophical circles wrapped in indulgence, while senators recited poetry while their fingers traced patterns in spilled wine. Others reenacted Dionysian rites under the influence of imported hashish or mushrooms, smuggled in with spices from the East. There were dances, yes, but also confessions, games of identity and dominance, masks passed from hand to hand, candles extinguished slowly. Rules dissolved in these gatherings. Gender roles blurred. Age became irrelevant. Names? Rarely spoken. All that mattered was surrender to sensation, to curiosity, to the exquisite unknowing of what might happen next. A wealthy widow might lie beside a gladiator. A young aristocrat might serve drinks naked to a table of judges. A priest of Apollo might whisper verses not meant for temples, but for skin. It was not always sexual, but it was always intimate, always dangerous in the Roman sense of danger, where pleasure might trip into scandal with one wrong name. Wine flowed from amphora unmarked by vintage. Music came not from lyres, but from drums, primal, insistent. And when dance began, it was not choreographed. It was instinctive. People moved in response to each other, to the firelight, to the smell of citrus and sweat and smoke. And within this barely structured chaos, truth emerged. Laughter cracked open arrogance. Tears slipped from eyes trained never to show weakness. The rich remembered, briefly, how to be bare. Some nights ended with nothing more than shared silence beneath cypress trees. Others with tangled limbs and aching ribs from too much joy. And some ended with reputations smoldering quietly by morning. Because while these gatherings were secret, they were not always safe. Informants sometimes lingered at the edge. Rival families watched for weakness. And in a world where lineage was currency, a misplaced word in a moonlit moment could cost a man his fortune, his marriage, or his seat in the Senate. Still, they came back, night after night, year after year, because something in these gatherings reminded them that they were not just patricians, not just citizens, but animals, humans, creatures of pulse and ache and fleeting beauty. These clubs were not escape. They were return to a part of the self civilization tried to bury beneath gold and law. And when dawn crept over the city, those same figures who had danced without names slipped back into their roles. Senators, priests, matrons, commanders, their eyes tired but glowing, their voices calm. No one spoke of what happened, but everything had changed. The masks had been set aside, and sometimes, for just a moment, they remembered who they were, without them. Now, as we leave the circle and step back into the curated calm of the domus, something follows us, a memory of movement, of wildness, of something nearly lost, but not yet. Because not all indulgences remain behind velvet curtains. Some, the most dangerous, spill into daylight, into policy, into rumor. And some become scandal. There are rooms in this house that no guest sees on their first visit. Small, locked spaces hidden between columns or tucked behind seemingly ordinary walls. They don't boast, they whisper, and within them, art waits. Not the art of conquest, not statues of triumph or reliefs of military glory,
these walls do not honor empire. They reveal something far older, something deeply human. Erotic frescoes, worn by time, yet undeniably vivid, stretch across plastered walls. Limbs entangled, eyes closed, bodies curved in motion or stillness. It's not vulgar, not lewd. It's ritual, a language of flesh passed down like myth. Here, sex isn't hidden. It isn't moralized. It simply exists, elevated, stylized, preserved. In a society where death was ever present and public life always on display, the domus became the one place where yearning could be shaped into something sacred, something permanent. A painted Leda embraces her swan. A Dionysian procession swirls through wine-stained twilight. A satyr grins from the corner, caught mid-motion, forever chasing a nymph who never quite turns away. Each image is deliberate, each curve and color part of a language the Romans never stopped refining. This is not pornography. This is performance, even in pigment. And sometimes art moved beyond the wall. Tucked behind a thick curtain or through a hallway that narrows with intent, a small private theater opens. A domus might have its own stage, not for public plays, but for intimate spectacles. Scenes curated for a select few. The audience? A handful of trusted companions. The performance? Anything the master desired. Actors, dancers, mimes, some enslaved, others hired, stepped onto these stages not just to entertain, but to awaken. Their scripts were old. Greek tragedies, Roman farce, or wholly invented stories meant to arouse not only the body, but the imagination. Imagine it, a lone performer bathed in lamplight, whispering lines in a voice too soft for amphitheaters, their gestures slow, intentional, the air heavy with frankincense and crushed petals. Outside, the city sleeps. Inside, a scene unfolds that no historian will ever write, but one the walls will remember. Some shows were comic, others ceremonial. A reenactment of sacred rites, a ritual dance to Venus, a silent act of seduction that lasted longer than any spoken word. Guests didn't clap. They breathed. They watched. They remembered. And for those few allowed to sit in velvet-draped corners and witness, the line between viewer and viewed slowly blurred. Eyes lingered. Hands inched closer. Desire curled around them all like smoke. It wasn't about lust. It was about presence, about holding attention and surrendering to story, even if the story only lasted the length of a song. No coins were exchanged afterward, no names spoken aloud. But in the hush that followed, as the fire burned low and performers vanished through unseen doors, something lingered. A truth too slippery for language, but heavy enough to press into the memory. And so the erotic in Roman life wasn't hidden away. It was framed in plaster, in performance, in ritual. Not for scandal, but for continuity. A reminder that even in power, even in empire, the body remained a temple, and desire, when offered with care, was not weakness, but worship. As you step out of this hidden chamber, The hallway feels longer. The lamps flicker lower. Somewhere a lyre sounds a gentle final note. But the evening isn't done. There are other gatherings, other games. Circles where the elite strip away even the last layer of formality and indulge in what the law, the gods, and sometimes even themselves forbid.
Pleasure in Rome was never just personal. It was political. And when secrets slipped from behind closed doors, or worse, when they were dragged into the light, what once thrilled in shadows became the very thing that could destroy. Whispers had power, a passing comment in a bathhouse, a servant's silence that felt too careful, a senator seen leaving the wrong villa too late into the night. All of it mattered. All of it could be weaponized. Because in a city obsessed with dignity, gravitas, even the suggestion of impropriety could undo a life. You see, scandal in Rome was not about morality. It was about control. A wife's lover might be forgiven if his family had enough land, but a freed man caught consorting with a noblewoman? That was sedition in silk. A general with a taste for boys could fight on as long as his victories kept coming, but let him lose a single battle and suddenly the Senate remembered every rumor. Some Romans used this knowledge artfully. Scandal wasn't just a risk, it was a blade. Enemies planted servants in rival houses. Gossip was fed, carefully, to clients and scribes. Pamphlets were passed by candlelight, telling exaggerated tales of drunken orgies, of naked rituals under moonlight, of indecencies staged before gods. Names were named, sometimes. Other times, just enough was left unsaid to let imagination do the work. And the public loved it. Rome thrived on spectacle, not just in the arena, but in its alleys, its baths, its whispers. Even emperors weren't safe. Caligula's nights became legend, not for what he actually did, but for what people believed he had done. Nero was said to have sung arias while dressed as a bride, and whether true or not, the stories stuck. They defined legacies, shaped uprisings, turned support into a revolt. What had begun as indulgence ended as condemnation. But the truth is, most of those who fell to scandal were not monsters. They were recognizably human. Vain, certainly. Curious. Lonely sometimes. Addicted not always to pleasure itself, but to the feeling of mattering, of being desired, of dancing just for a night outside the rules they had spent their lives enforcing. And that is perhaps the great irony of Roman indulgence. It was never about freedom. It was about control, of others, of image, of desire itself. And when that control slipped, when pleasure stopped obeying the script, Rome turned its back. The villa was shuttered. The mosaics cracked with time. The name? Erased from history. Or nearly. Because tonight, in this quiet space we share, that name is spoken again, softly, without judgment. Not to excuse, not to glorify, but to remember. The line between decadence and downfall was razor thin, and the Romans, they walked it nightly.
Power in Rome was rarely shouted. It was whispered, across pillows, in curtained alcoves, and over wine that no longer tasted like grapes. By now, you know the villa by feel, The way footsteps vanish into its velvet dark, the way voices bend around its corners. And yet, there are rooms you've never entered, locked not with keys, but with silence. Tonight, we turn the handle. Behind one such door is not a bedroom in the usual sense. It is more like a chamber of negotiation, where desire is a language and every caress is a contract. There are no scrolls here, no seals, and yet agreements are struck that will ripple through the Senate, through battlefields, through dynasties. Rome was built on conquest, yes, but it was maintained on favors, and favors, in the dark, were never free. Imagine a nobleman's heir, too young, too reckless, falling into the arms of someone beneath his station, or a patrician widow whose bed was never empty, but whose alliances were never quite obvious, or a slave, highly educated, trained not just to please, but to observe. Their eyes were sharper than any dagger, and far more dangerous. Pillow talk could crown a man or ruin him. And those who knew how to listen, not just with ears, but with intuition, became Rome's quietest wielders of influence. They never stood in the forum, but they decided what was said there. Blackmail wasn't always dramatic. It might take the form of a sudden silence, a lover who no longer returned messages, or the careful mention of a night best forgotten, slipped into conversation like perfume. Sometimes it was protection that was offered, other times it was permission to rise, with the understanding that the hand lifting you could also let go. And behind it all, desire. Not just for bodies, but for leverage, for knowing something no one else did, for mattering in the moments where truth was too dangerous to speak aloud. These games were subtle, and they left no marks, at least not on the skin. But reputations wore thin, trust became brittle, and even love, when it came, had to be weighed against usefulness. You might ask, did anyone win? Sometimes, briefly. But power in Rome was a borrowed thing, and the bedroom, it was only ever safe until the morning. Still, there were those who played beautifully, who gave just enough and withheld more, who made themselves unforgettable not by offering everything, but by seeming to. And when their names faded, as names must, they left behind no monuments, only stories. But tonight, that's enough. A rustle of sheets, a sigh in the dark, a sentence spoken just once and remembered forever.
Time, like ash, settles slowly. The villas that once glittered with laughter and lamplight now lie in disrepair. Roofs sag, gardens go wild. Mosaics, once polished by the tread of silk sandals, crack and curl at the edges. The water no longer sings in the fountains. It pools in silence, fed only by rain and neglect. You walk the same halls, but now there are no servants to part the curtain, no music to follow, only echoes, the softened ghosts of footsteps that once danced, conspired, seduced. It is not just the building that has faded, it is a world. Rome has shifted. The empire, stretched too far, begins to pull at its seams. Emperors rise and fall faster than the marble can be recarved.
Coin grows thin, grain grows rarer, and with it the luxuries that once defined elite life slip into memory. The domus, so carefully constructed to perform power, no longer speaks the same language. The atriums still echo, but with emptiness. The peristyles still bloom, but with weeds. Statues are missing fingers. Paintings have been scratched, not by vandals, but by time itself. A slow, patient defacement. Some families abandon these houses altogether. Others retreat inside them, hoarding what little they have left behind locked doors and drawn curtains. And some pretend. They host feasts with cheaper wine. They light fewer lamps, but speak louder. They polish what remains, not out of pride, but desperation. Because in Rome, decline was not just feared, it was humiliating. To fall was one thing, to be seen falling was worse. You notice the changes most in what is no longer said. The gossip dries up. The bedrooms grow quiet. The courtesans disappear or move on to newer, smaller courts. And the eyes of the household gods, the lares, still perched in their dusty niches, seem to look away. The domus, once a symbol of appetite and elegance, becomes a tomb of performance. Every rug, every fresco, every half-filled amphora is a memory clinging to relevance. And yet, even in decline, there is beauty. A single oil lamp still burns in one of the cubicola. A child's footprint remains set in the hardened clay of a courtyard. A love poem, scratched hastily onto a wall, survives where gold has crumbled. This twilight, this soft decay, is not just an ending, it is the beginning of forgetting. But tonight, you are here, and in your quiet gaze, the domus lives again, if only for a little while. You step carefully through a triclinium where frescoes fade like dreams. The table is gone. The couches are eaten by time. But on the wall, just faintly, you see the outline of grapes, painted long ago by a hand that likely never imagined a world without Rome. In the back garden, where roses once curled along clean lines of stone, wildflowers now bloom freely. Nature, untouched, has begun its gentle rebellion. A vine curls up the statue of Bacchus. A bird nests in the broken urn meant for perfumed oil. Even decay can be sacred when we stop to see it. You pass under archways darkened by soot, not from disaster, but from the slow burn of forgotten fires. The domus hasn't fallen in flame. It's faded by breath, by season, by time. Somewhere in the corner, half-shuttered, is a scroll. Left behind, perhaps, or too heavy with memory to carry away. On its brittle surface, faint ink tells the story of a dinner party. Names now lost, dishes no longer served, laughter that once echoed, but now whispers only in imagination. And then the silence becomes generous. It gives you space to think, to feel, to mourn. Because what is a ruin if not a reminder?
that all things, even empires, even marble, must soften, must crumble, must return. But before they vanish, they speak. And if we listen closely, as you are doing now, we can still hear the footfalls, the laughter, the heated breath of power and passion in its prime. This house, this domus, was not just a place of pleasure, it was a mirror reflecting a civilization's ideals, fears, vanities, hungers. And as the mirror cracks, we are left not with nothing, but with fragments, and fragments, when cherished, still shine. So breathe here just a little longer. Let your gaze linger on the chipped fresco. Let your fingers feel the worn lip of the stone basin. Let the weight of this quiet tell you something words cannot. Not all history is grand. Some of it is tender, fading, gentle. But it is no less real, and in your imagination, lit softly by a distant star, this domus stands once more, whole.
The night has grown still. Not the silence of absence, but the hush of reverence, the breath you take when stepping into a sacred ruin. Tonight, we are not just watching history, we are becoming part of it. Beneath your feet, the marble has cooled. Dew glistens on the overgrown leaves curling through the cracks of old peristyles. Somewhere in the dark, an owl calls once, then fades again. The domus, long abandoned, does not sleep. It waits. And you, a traveler through time, cloaked not in a toga but in curiosity, have reached its heart. This is where it ends, but also where something lingers. You stand before a broken wall. Behind it, the faint outline of a fresco. A woman reclining on a couch, one arm draped over her eyes in laughter or exhaustion. The paint is almost gone, her smile barely visible. But it is enough. Enough to remind you that here, once, someone lived. Desired much. Desire is perhaps the only part of Rome that never truly died. It's in the way these ruins still compel, in the hush of museums where schoolchildren pause not at the statues of gods or generals, but at a carved marble of two lovers entangled. It's in the fragments, a gold pin, a perfume vial, a worn-out dice. Each object, a whisper of a night we'll never fully understand, but can always imagine. Because desire is storytelling, and Rome, in all its pleasures and excesses, was a storyteller's paradise. It told tales with feasts and frescoes, with hidden chambers and forbidden guests. It layered truth and illusion until the walls themselves could blush. But the empire crumbled, as all empires do. The voices faded. The laughter stopped. And what was left? Echoes. Echoes in ruins, in language, in us. The way we light candles for atmosphere, the way we still gather to dine, reclining into conversation and wine, the way we dress, undress, perform, the way pleasure and power remain tangled in politics, in art, in love. Rome is not gone, it's rewritten. Each generation reimagines it, turns the broken into beauty, finds wisdom in the erotic, poetry in the opulent, reflection in the ruin. Even now, as you lay in bed or sit, quietly listening in some dark corner of your night, you are part of the ritual of remembering, of conjuring the past, not through dates and names, but through feeling. Through a hand on a mosaic, a curtain drawn back, a single goblet lifted in candlelight. This is why we tell these stories, not to relive Rome, but to listen to it. Its long, sultry breath across centuries, its indulgent sigh, its warning, its wonder. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy and the domus begins to fade, remember this. The richest Romans built sanctuaries not to show their power, but to hold their longings that were private, complex, and deeply, deeply human. And what is more eternal than that? Sleep well, traveler. The ruins will still be here when you wake. So now the lamps have gone out. The laughter has faded, and the marble halls are once again still. But maybe, just maybe, you can still feel something. A warmth in the stone, a whisper in the dark, a lingering echo of the lives that once moved through those rooms with longing, with ambition, with hunger for something more than power. History isn't just war and conquest. Sometimes it's the quiet clink of a wine goblet, a footstep in the peristyle, a look exchanged in torchlight. And that's what we've traced tonight. Not the fall of Rome, but the ache that lived inside it. If this kind of gentle descent into the past brings you a sense of calm or wonder, or even just company, I'm so glad you're here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time history found you tonight. I always love seeing how far this circle of quiet wanderers reaches. Before you drift, feel free to subscribe, but only if this kind of slow, careful storytelling helps you rest. And if you return, the ruins will be waiting. Sleep well. Good night.